sections in the chapter, and that would starts with these characteristics of life, things that need to be done by living organisms so that they can accomplish what they need to accomplish. Would include movement, responsiveness, growth, reproduction, and respiration. Movement changes your position so you can manipulate yourself within the environment, but it requires the movement of materials internally to yourself as well. So digestion, the digestive system has to propel food from one end of your digestive tract to the other. So movement is not just moving from place to place or manipulating your environment. It happens internally as well. Responsiveness is the ability to react to a change either inside or outside your body. It can be an important part of the nervous system. Growth is an increase in size, or we are made of cells, so that means an increase in the number of cells or the size of the cells. Reproduction is the production not only of new offspring, but also of replacing damaged tissues and damaged cells within the body during the course of our lifetime. Respiration is the act of breathing in which we obtain oxygen for our mitochondria, get rid of carbon dioxide that was generated in the process of using that oxygen. So these are all things that are involved in living organisms in general. And collectively they are called metabolism, which is really just a word that represents all the possible chemical reactions that are occurring in our bodies. In order for life to be maintained by ourselves or any organisms, there are some 5 things in the environment that must be kept at certain levels. We need a minimum of them, and we can't have an excess of them. First of all is water. Water is the most abundant substance in our body, the most prevalent chemical in our body. We look for life on other planets. We don't look for proteins. We don't look for DNA and RNA. We look for water first. It's required for transportation of substances. Most of the solutions we'll talk about this year are water-based solutions. And its properties make it very good for helping us to maintain temperature. We need food. Within the food, we have necessary nutrients. The food also has carbohydrates that we use for energy to make ATP. And it's going to supply the raw materials and amino acids and the like for building living tissue. We need oxygen. Many organisms, most organisms, I think I would venture to say, need oxygen. It's only about 1/5 of the air. It's not a huge part of it, but it's enough to keep us alive. And we need that oxygen to power our mitochondria so that we can make ATP and use that ATP to do the things we need to do, the metabolism that we need. Heat is a form of energy in the environment. It helps to maintain our body temperature. It to a degree, controls the rate of metabolic reactions, although we are able to maintain a pretty stable body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. We are affected by heat in the environment. And pressure is the atmospheric pressure, mostly what we're talking about. The atmospheric pressure, we can only live in a very narrow range of the planet. If we go too high in altitude, we don't have enough pressure to breathe. If we go too low, we don't have enough. We have too much pressure to breathe the way we need to. And we will also talk about hydrostatic pressures when we talk about filtration and the like in the body. These things lead us to the idea of homeostasis. Homeostasis is the maintenance of a stable internal environment, and there are a number of homeostatic mechanisms that are out there. These are self-regulating systems monitoring and responding to changes in the environment. There's going to be a receptor, a control center, and an effector. The receptor detects what is happening now. The control center knows what it should be and what to do if it's not there. And then if it's not there, the control center would tell the effector to respond in some way to bring the whatever it is, the substance we're talking about, to its correct set point. So we have a stimulus. When a change occurs in our environment, usually the internal environment we're talking about, the receptor detects that. A control center compares the change to what it's supposed to be at, and it sends a message to an effector, which is usually a muscle or a gland, to respond in some way so that your stimulus is either reduced or increased. But almost always it will be reduced. So that reducing the initial stimulus is called negative feedback. And it's very important that you do away with your connotations of negative when we're talking about feedback, because negative feedback is very important. Negative feedback provides for fine tuning. Negative is not bad when it comes to homeostatic mechanisms. So we can talk about the thermostat in our home as working on negative feedback. You set the temperature in your house on the thermostat. If the temperature goes a little low, the furnace turns on, the air heats up, thermostat registers that you've heated up, and then it will turn off the furnace. If you get a really nice house, you may have air conditioning as well. And if the house gets too hot, the air conditioner will kick in and cool down the house and bring it back to the set temperature. That's not going to stay at the set temperature constantly, but if you average out the temperature over the course of a 24-hour period, it's going to be pretty close. The average is going to be pretty close to what you set the thermostat for. And those are the same kinds of mechanisms we have for many different things in our body. We can do the same mechanism with temperature. Our body has a thermostat that's set at 37 degrees. If it gets a little cooler, there are things that we can do. Shivering, for one, putting on more clothes, that will help raise our body temperature back to where it should be, and then those signals stop. If our bodies get too hot, we sweat, take off clothes, and that is a mechanism to keep our body temperature where it's supposed to be, so that no matter what it is outside, we can keep the temperature around 37 degrees Celsius. And we can do the same things with blood sugar. You can make respiration rates. These are all controlled negative feedback loops, and the negative feedback is a fine-tuning way to do it. And that's usually the mechanism used. There are a couple of examples where we don't want to fine-tune it. A couple of examples in anatomy and physiology, common examples, there are others, where positive feedback is what you want. In a positive feedback loop, you're going to increase the initial stimulus. So these things you don't need to fine-tune. You want almost an all or nothing phenomenon to occur. The two examples that we'll run into through the course of the year, normal examples, are blood clotting and childbirth. These are both things that you don't need to fine-tune. When it's time, it's time. You don't want to worry. You want to create a blood clot and stop the bleeding once the clotting starts. It's time to deliver a baby. It's time to deliver the baby, and mechanisms go into play that increase the signals to deliver the baby. So positive feedback does have a couple of places where it comes to play, but in general, almost all feedback loops in anatomy and physiology are negative feedback loops, because negative feedback allows the fine-tuning of the response. So negative feedback is the most common type of mechanism. It returns conditions to within that normal range that you want. It is only called negative because it reduces the initial stimulus. It's not a bad thing at all. It prevents sudden, severe changes, and we control things like body temperature, blood pressure, and glucose levels with negative. Positive feedback is much more uncommon. There are times besides the two I mentioned, but in here it's called positive because you're increasing the initial signal, and this will produce unstable conditions that seem like they will not lead to homeostasis, but eventually they will. So blood clotting, for example, you clot the blood, that homeostasis keeps the blood where it belongs. Uterine contractions deliver the baby, and you return back to your state pre-pregnancy. I'm going to take a break there, and then next we'll go into organization of the human body